Sorry if I sound a little off in today's video. In the process of recording and scripting this video, I was pretty sick, and while that's died down, I've been left with a sore throat and developed an earache as a separate problem. So, I'll probably sound a little off, but can barely hear myself to tell just how far off, so I can't do all that much about it. Anyway, so Sestancia. Fun mod by Roger van der Wade, if quite different to his usual stuff. It got a sequel, which was the entire reason I played it in the first place, which should hopefully conclude the narrative after picking up from the downer ending the last part finished on. Ugh, or not. It's a dense mod, so let's get going before my eyes end up going as well and I can't even read my script, much less record it. There are 22 levels in Sestancia 2, though I must preface this review by saying I only actually played 17 of them. I think the others must be secrets or bonuses, and you probably get them for collecting emblems or Chaos Emeralds, neither of which I really bothered scouring levels for. 15 of those are part of the main story, which sees you fighting back against Eggman to free Sestancia, after the last part saw him complete his takeover using Soda's disseminated virus catering business. From a level design perspective though, the biggest difference between the two parts is the near total removal of levels outside the Roger formula. Sestancia 1 had plenty of standard levels, but dotted between them were hub worlds and cutscenes which were much shorter and generally bared the brunt of the work connecting levels together and justifying their themes and ordering. The apparent reasoning for that approach was, looking at the update logs and discussions on the SRP2 forums, seemingly because Roger couldn't figure out how to do proper cutscenes, and so just made them into levels instead. In the years between the two parts, it appears he has figured this out, as the biggest upgrade 2 can lord over the original is the massive improvement made to the set pieces found in the levels. With the use of fixed camera angles, animating textures, dynamic changes to levels, and sound effects, set pieces have gone from arguably not existing to really quite impressive for SRB2. Sestancia 2 is a lot more bombastic than 1, with almost every level having some sort of big moment or plot twist. Whether it's roads being blown out from under you as you race across the island's main highway, or crashing a huge military convoy after destroying their navigation systems, or SWAT bots attempting to ambush you as you make it back to civilization, you're unlikely to lament the removal of those hub worlds and cutscenes when, in reality, they've just been better integrated with the standard levels. There's also a greater variety of gimmicks and unique elements between levels. Part 1 really only had 2, debatably 3 ways of making a level, discounting the aforementioned cutscenes and hub worlds. A completely bog-standard Roger stage, an Emerald Hunt, and Run, though that's really just a standard Roger stage with a level of auto-run applied to you. In Part 2, one level will have water slides, one level will have sort of stealth sections, one level will cause you go 2D to outrun a rampaging bull. This is luckily nowhere near as infuriating as a similar stage in Adventure Genesis. One level will introduce office chairs you can ride on alongside a whole game show section, and another will have crystals that cause various positive and negative effects. Comparatively speaking, there's just a lot more variety from one level to another. And despite something I'll get to in just a second, when that is paired with better pacing that stops levels with similar aesthetics from being placed in particularly quick succession, each level stands out on its own instead of being regarded more so in groups rather than individually. With that being said, I feel Roger has made more of an active effort to make Sestancia feel like a physical place you are running through this time, which manifests in various ways. Firstly, levels are more alive. I'll dig a little deeper into that once we get into the aesthetics of the mod, but there are a lot more breakable objects and interactive NPCs as you are running through levels than in the last one, which ties into the whole narrative of the mod. You're a freedom fighter running missions for a resistance movement, so not only are there recurring characters who have more to say than just a one-off line like in the first part, as you run through levels you'll be smashing vases, knocking over civilians, toppling statues and generally acting like a force of nature unleashed on a hapless Eggman. It makes you feel a lot more powerful and present than anything achieved in part 1. put it that way. As I just mentioned, the other way this grounding of the setting has been achieved is by 1. Providing a map. I love maps, I used to want to be a cartographer. And 2. By repeating level segments a lot more successfully than before. Little bits of previous levels were occasionally reused in Sestancia 1, but not really in a way that felt like it meant anything. Party Like It's 1959 and Bootleggin' both had some similar sections as they took place in the same building, but I just didn't feel anything from that. Same with Santa D'Or. He ran through an identical version of it twice, but it didn't feel like I'd really gotten back to the same place, you know? Whereas here, the main section that is reused is not all, the resistance base, and because of the structure of the level pack, that feels important. Because each group of levels is generally you running to a place, executing some resistance plot, and then extraditing yourself, it feels justified that you'd return to Noto for your next mission briefing. And even if the actual geography of the area doesn't change, characters move around and have new conversations, that it does feel like it's evolving over time. Same with Alcudia and Santa D'Or. You see some similar sections multiple times, but there's enough of a difference and it's spaced out enough through the level pack that it feels like time has passed and the situation in those areas has changed. Maybe I haven't explained all that too well, but if you place all Sestancia 1 and 2 back to back, I think you'll see what I mean and the difference in how the asset reuse feels. But that effort into making Sestancia into a physical place is also probably where some of my critiques with the mod begin to creep in. I have 3 problems, most of which have been cleared up by a second playthrough, but which makes that initial playthrough a bit awkward. First up is the degradation of the flow I've come to expect from Roger's levels, and while I think there are definitive improvements when it comes to set pieces and level gimmicks, I also feel there are an increased number of segments that feel awkward or confusing to navigate. One of the big ones is that you tend to loop back on yourself more here than in previous Roger packs, which can make it difficult to tell where you need to go. I'll give 2 examples from my first playthrough. In the Royal Palace, there's a section where you need to collect a key to open a door to progress. You get a cutscene to show the door opening, but it's in the previous room, where you can't see it from your perch. If you're like me and miss the door as you enter the room to grab the key, you might spend a fair amount of time running around the room to figure out where you're going before you figure out you need to go out from the corridor you entered and find the door tucked away in the corner. It's just not very natural for a Sonic game, and especially Roger's SRB2 levels, to ask you to exit a room the same way you entered it to progress, especially when there's nothing leading you that way once you jump down from your perch if you didn't see the path forward initially. So maybe spawning a trail of rings or something upon collecting the key might help. Secondly, there's a point in the TV studio where you loop back to the start of the level. To progress, you need to run through a set and then through a door, but nothing about the said door indicates it's anything more than a wall texture. As such, the first time round, I assumed triggering the filming on the set had changed something earlier in the level, so as I couldn't see the path forward, I left the set, then carried on through the door that was opened at the start of the level, to basically end up repeating it all again. Again, this is cleaned up on a second try, but confusion could be reduced by shutting off that initial path and making the door forward open slightly ajar, which is generally the visual language used elsewhere in the mod to so you can run through a door. It's probably not the same door problem AAA devs say they keep having, but it's still a point of confusion. My second problem is that the level pack is initially actually pretty hard. On my first playthrough, there were a lot of sections that I was thinking, oof, that seems a bit unfair. Some of that stemmed from lack in experience with the level's design, but even on the playthrough I recorded, I still thought that there were difficulty spikes here and there. While there are individual parts I found quite difficult in various levels for their own reasons, there are 3 recurring causes of difficulty. 1. The levels are long. Some levels can stretch to 6 to 7 minutes easily even once you've got some experience and know the layout, which can make restarting them frustrating, especially when compounded with 2. Checkpoints are few and far between. Sometimes you can lose a lot of progress on a level if you die. The extent of that can vary from level to level and is probably skewed by how long stretches of really easy platforming is squashed between small segments that are much more difficult. But the most extreme example I can give is where I was 5 minutes into Mount Terra Centro, only to get knocked off a cliff by an egg pawn to be sent all of the way back to the beginning of the level. That hurt. 3. Platforms are really fast. The Great Jungle Wall, TV Studio and Robotropolis tunnels all contain platforms or obstacles that move up and down really fast, which makes them either hard to avoid or hard to land on. I must have died 6 or 7 times in TV Studio and Robotropolis tunnels each to either these bouncy blocks knocking me into a pit or running out of time on my bomb while trying to land on a platform. These need to be retuned. I'm almost convinced it's some sort of FPS capping problem due to the severity of some of these cases, like you see in a lot of half-arsed ports and remasters. My final problem is with the boss fights. They suck. There are 3, 5 if you count the 2 times you run through some sort of installation to attack a big circular weak point, and none of them are very good, though all for different reasons. First is Fang, who employs an attack pattern Roger is strangely fond of, where he jumps up and down to fire projectile directly downwards. Very similar bosses keep appearing in different Roger level packs, but they rely exclusively on you not recognizing their timing. Once you've learnt it, they die in seconds, and they never pose a threat even before that point. The second boss is Orbot and Qbot, but this is a joke one. They die in one hit and have no attacks. Finally, and this is the worst one, you have the final fight against Metal Sonic. He's got a whole range of attacks he uses sequentially, but it is just one that really knocks him. His barrage of bullets. He floats too far off the arena floor to hit him normally, so you need to make your way to these elevated sections to hit him. But this stops you from having the space to run or hide from this salvo. It's annoyingly his most used attack as well, as he uses it first and then returns to it at the end of his first phase, and your only real option is to tank it out, hope you can grab rings quickly, then attack before he can fire another volley. Maybe it was an attempt to force an extremely aggressive strategy on the player, but it falls flat on its face and it instead just feels awful. Not sure how you'd go around fixing it, and you can prepare for it if you follow my aforementioned strategy, but that's temperamental and it needs to be looked at. Overall though, when it comes to the level design, I'm looking at it from 2 different perspectives, the first timer and the second and so on timer. It's pretty miserable that first time when you don't know the level design and you're going the wrong way and you don't know timings and a lot of the levels feel less polished than in part 1. It's hard and you're losing big chunks of progress each time you die, and I felt my motivation to keep playing drained away pretty quickly, especially in the middle portion of the pack. But playing it a second time, where you're not just trying to figure out where you're going and you have some more experience, makes it a lot easier to appreciate the change to the formula and why it happened. I turned to liking it for more than just the aesthetics and narrative, and while there are still annoying moments, like, come on, what even happened here, they are a lot less common. So yeah, the level design is good, but you'll probably need to play through it more than once to appreciate that. I know I did. The narrative of Soul Sestancia was Eggman using mind-controlling Soda to take over the titular island, and by the end of the level pack, that takeover had been completed. The entire island had fallen under his control, and the small number of rebels left, including the player, had been banished to the swamps and forests at the island's centre. Soul Sestancia 2 picks up from the final level of the original, and indeed carries on the narrative to show how the rebels take on missions to begin weakening Eggman's forces from their base in the jungles, although it does drop the soda thing due to it not really being relevant at this point. I think the narrative here is a little more interesting than last time, as that one was really just a constant ramping up of stakes from moment one up until the end. You never really get a victory. You just run to one place so you can run to another place so you can run to the place after that, over and over again until you finally hit the ending. There's just a bit more of a back and forth here, as you and the rebels complete a mission, Eggman retaliates, you counterattack, so on and so forth. Because you have a base you can keep returning to in the form of Knothole, you can also see how the missions are affecting the island, as more and more civilians flee there, and there are plenty of fun interactions you can have with a growing list of interactive NPCs. On the Eggman side, his threat is also built up better than before. In part 1, his takeover basically happened in the background over the course of 2 to 3 levels, where you're off in the jungle, and he didn't ever feel like a threat. He was just running through levels, and anything he did cause, like the soldier overflows and panics, felt like they were there mostly by accident. They just happened to be there, instead of them feeling like they were specifically after you. Here, the badnik hordes build up over time as Eggman grows more and more desperate to destroy you, starting with basic SWAT bots before future levels introduce more and more dangerous foes in an escalation of the conflict. It just feels more like an advancing storyline, even if it still doesn't end. The final level sees you face off against Metal Sonic in an underground facility just for Eggman to announce Phase 3 of his plan and leave you on another cliffhanger. See you in another 4 years, Roger. Aesthetically, the mod is still in Roger's usual style. Hand-drawn, off-model, looks like it came from a late noughties Newgrounds animated sketch. I wouldn't say the art style itself has been improved or refined in the last 4 years per se, but there are still improvements. They're just in other aspects of the presentation. The work to ground Sestancia as a place, as mentioned earlier, is but one example, with each level opening up with a map of the island to show where you are and, in a scenario where you are supposedly travelling particularly far, where the level begins and ends. It just makes the island feel more like a place, and clarifies some things while allowing for some callbacks to the previous level pack. Santa d'Or is a separate city to Arcadia that contains the university from part 1, for example, while Uptown isn't just some random nightlife bonus stage, but rather the most developed part of the original city of Arcadia, while Robotropolis is being developed to the north of it. I also mentioned earlier the destructible objects, but this is another thing that makes Sestancia feel more alive than before. It stops areas from feeling like empty corridors with some nice decoration, as you smash through windows and vases, and bowl over maids and chefs to reach your destination. The camera shake and use of audio effects as you do it ramp up the intensity of the level as well, especially when Rogers had the foresight to place them in their greatest quantities, in areas where you'll be speeding through fast-paced set pieces. And finally, the overhaul to cutscenes has been accompanied by a massive boost to their presentation. The use of camera angles and animating sprites to bring attention to a particular character, or to allow antagonists to react to your actions as you pass through a level, is only really outclassed in SRB2 by the opening and credits to Mindscape in the Silverhorn characters pack, and is a massive step up to the approach taken before, where you'd run through a dedicated level listening to disembodied voice lines, and maybe seeing this sort of thing 3 to 4 times throughout the whole pack. Additionally, you now have subtitles, so you can tell what a character is saying, even when the voice actor isn't using a particularly good mic, or hamming up a voice to the extent it becomes unintelligible. Just a lot more professional, and it's utilised in a way that makes Eggman feel more intimidating as he watches over you, sends military convoys and gloats over a telecom, while also making the Resistance feel more involved, as they send encouragement over the radio, direct you personally through some of the earlier missions, and have meetings over what action they should take next. I don't think the music in Sestancia 2 is quite as good as 1. While there are more original themes which are pretty good and well arranged for their context, the selection of third-party tracks isn't quite as zany and varied as before. I mean, it still is zany and varied, but maybe because of the lack of Hideki Naganuma. Hello there, this is post-editing the Jacoman here, just to say that there is indeed a Hideki Naganuma song in this level pack. It's called Black Hot Vodka, and alongside Golden 20s, it's probably the best song in the level pack, so, oops. I just wasn't going out and looking for the songs to listen to outside of the mod. Maybe you'll enjoy the song choices more than the first part if you don't like songs that feel like a guy getting a soundboard and hitting every sample he can find. There still aren't really any bad choices or songs I actively disliked. I wasn't a huge fan of the Eggman Game Show music initially, but I came around to it more after I played it again when not in the middle of developing a migraine. And they still have the best song from the OG present, Golden 20s by Wolfgang Law and alias and Uptown, but it's inferior to me. Have to stress that. It's inferior to me. Personally, I like a little more Daft Punk in my mods. Thank you, Hideki Naganuma. But while we're reminiscing on the last video's topic, you might have remembered that a point of contention for the mod to me was in the voice acting department. Specifically, the use of AI voice acting. Was not a fan of that at all. I even said I hoped this sequel would lack it. Good news, it's all gone. Or at the very least, it's not credited, and I never heard anything that made me suspicious. That immediately bumps up the voice acting score, and is boosted again by the implementation of the aforementioned subtitles. As I said in the last video, the voice acting is good, but it's a bit all over the place in terms of volume and quality due to the use of smaller freelance/amateur voice actors, and so it can be hard to tell what some characters are saying. The subtitles don't fix the problem, merely patch over it, but it makes sure the flaw remains a charming characteristic, and not a frustration as you try and figure out what characters are saying. The improvements to the VA by themselves knock Sestancia up a point or two, but do any of the flaws elsewhere drag it back down? Well, if you were to ask me that question after my first playthrough, I'd have definitely said yes. It's more confusing than the original level pack, with a poorer sense of momentum out the gate. It's sometimes weirdly hard and yet lacks a lot of checkpoints to compensate in these very long levels, and it's capped off with a really bad final boss. There are improvements to the setting and I prefer the narrative, but it wouldn't have been enough to overlook the level design flaws. But it's crazy just how negative you can be on something when a migraine is slowly developing as you're playing through it. And once I'd rested, drank some water and came back to finish another playthrough the next day, my thoughts had completely shifted. With more experience under my belt to know what the mod was going to ask of me in each level segment, I could build back up to the level of flow I'd expect of a Roger van der Weyde stage, and so the improved presentation could really shine through a lot more and not be eclipsed by me not having much fun. There are still some things that I think aren't too great. The final boss in its current form will never be good. Some platforms move way too quickly. I did experience a variety of glitches, and it is a level pack that requires multiple playthroughs to feel like you're able to run through like a force of nature, which is new from Roger, but I came to enjoy it a lot. Sucks that we're still waiting to see how the saga will end, but let's look at what I thought needed to be done to improve Sestancia. Keep up a consistent level design quality, and remove the AI voice acting. Well, they did both. I'm going to give Sestancia 2 an 8 out of 10. I hope you enjoyed the video, and ciao.